So you wouldn't know it just to look at it, but this drum set that's behind me is actually a very special drum set because 7 years ago, this was actually the first drum set that my daughters and I bought to fix up and flip to resell. And so it recently came back on the local market, and I recognized it, and the price was right. So I decided to buy it again and flip it again. And so I thought I'd take this opportunity to make a quick video where I talk through some of the things I've learned in the past 7 years of flipping drum sets on the side, and what I look for, what it takes to do it, and some lessons learned, some mistakes I've made, and also some best practices I've figured out. So, in any event, let's take a look at this kit and talk through a few things. Okay, so let me talk real quick about sort of broadly about our kind of business model / business strategy when it comes to these kits. So first off, we've expanded into not only selling drum sets, but also guitars and pro and vintage cymbals and pro and vintage snares. But those things kind of have their own considerations. So we set those aside because they'd probably be their own video. Similarly, we will occasionally take the plunge into a pro level or vintage grade kit. But for those, I have to feel like it's a slam dunk. I have to feel like it's already in desirable condition, mostly because the tolerance for little bumps and bruises and blemishes on those kind of kits is kind of understandably much lower. And if a kit has any kind of issues, you're either going to have pretty significant expense to bring it back up to snuff, or else you're going to cut your market down considerably, waiting for the right buyer who will fall in love with that kit for what it is and love it for what it is. So for those reasons, obviously if it's already in pretty desirable condition, it's probably priced accordingly, and so it's rare that you can like find that little wiggle room where something is undervalued for one reason or another, and that you can jump on it and turn around and have some profit margin attached to it. So mostly what we do, starting with this exact kit 7 years ago, is assemble complete beginner or intermediate grade kits that have everything you need to take it home and play it right away. And with those, what we're looking at when we try to assess what we're buying, it's how much TLC and or rehab is this kit going to require to get to the point where it's a complete kit ready to take home and play today. So on one end of the spectrum, the sort of easy end would be, looks like it's in good shape, looks like it has everything it needs, it probably just needs to be tuned, and then away we go. But those, like the vintage kits, it's kind of few and far between that you have a kit that's completely undervalued. Although that happens more with beginner grade kits, because there's kind of this scenario of get this thing out of my basement. So when we have a get this thing out of my basement kit, where it's like, some kid was going to learn to play the drums, they kind of gave up on it, and now this thing's been sitting taking up space, and somebody just wants it out of there, and they're almost at the level where they would just give it away, but they recognize it has some value, but they probably don't really understand what kind of value it has, and they just put it up for sale for $50 or $100, and it's like, you got to jump on it and get it. Those are great, but few and far between and very competitive. The next would be that, and kind of related, would be it needs to be tuned and also cleaned, that it's dirty. That's very common for us to see ones where it just really needs 20 minutes of elbow grease, and then it'll be in much better condition. The next level up would be that it needs one or more new heads, and to that end we have taken pains to stockpile good used heads with lots of life left in them. So we stockpile several things we might need. When we have the opportunity to buy used heads in bulk for cheap, then we jump on that. We have the opportunity to buy used hardware for cheap, we jump on that. Used cymbals for cheap, we jump on that. And anytime we get from one way or another a chance to get some parts, then we try to jump on that too, because those things are all necessary. And if you're trying to buy those things in a moment of need, you will not get a good price on it, and it will end up being a significant expense. And so that kind of brings us to the next stages of that hierarchy, where it's missing hardware. It's missing one or more pieces of hardware, meaning the pedal or the stands that are required to set it up. It's missing symbols, or the symbols it has are unacceptable. The sort of generic brand pie plate symbols that don't really sound right, don't really sound like symbols. If you put those on a kit, it's just not going to appeal very much to many people. So we find that it's necessary to have good starter grade symbols, but good symbols that sound like symbols in order to sell a kit. And then the hardest one is actually that it's missing parts, because the expense of like trying to buy parts new, even a small thing like floor tom legs or bass drum spur or new parts, are actually kind of expensive when you get right down to it. And used parts, you don't really have your pick of the crop from wherever you want to go. So that's kind of where we're at, is that the more of that stuff we're going to need, the more you got to calculate in, what's the ceiling for what we could sell this thing for, and how much expense is going to eat up that profit margin. Is it worth it to proceed? So let me talk to you a little more specifically about the history of this kit, and sort of the first time around versus this time around. So with this kit, again, 7 years ago, this was the first drum set that I looked at in Craigslist and thought, I can see a way forward to flip this kit and make a little money. And the thing about it that caught my attention initially was that this was a kit that had, had a really nice snare and a couple really nice cymbals attached to it. So it had a vintage Ludwig standard aluminum snare, which is, kind of secretly pretty much as good as an acrylite, pretty desirable, and something that I could lift out and sell separately. And it had a vintage Zildjian, an 18-inch vintage Zildjian crash ride, that similarly I could lift out and sell separately. Now, I made some mistakes with this kit as well. And also, since it was the first kit I had, kind of learned the hard way some of what I talked about with our the need to stockpile things. So this kit, when we first got it, obviously I was taking away its snare, and I needed to get a replacement snare. And so that meant that I suddenly had, I forget what I ended up spending, but probably around $40 just to get a replacement chrome over steel snare. Now, the snare I actually got for it at the time is one that now I would be hesitant to just put on a kit and flip, because it in and of itself was kind of a nice snare. It was a Tama, I can't remember if it was a Rockstar or an Imperial Star, but I think it was a Tama Imperial Star. And it was, a early 80s chrome over steel, really tight, really popping kind of snare. So it was a really nice, pretty nice snare. Somewhere along the line, someone has recognized that and kept that, and not sent it moving forward. And instead, we've got this a little bit more generic, like CB700 kind of, decent snare. But that's really what I should have been trying to find back then. Although if it was actually $40, that's a great price on that Tama. Similarly, I did not really. These days, I'd be kicking myself that I sold it with this symbol still on it. This is a Zildjian A. It's an 18-inch rock crash, and at the time, my sophistication about checking the stamps was low, and I didn't recognize that this is actually a 70s symbol. What was I thinking to keep this on this kit? This by itself is similarly valuable to the other symbol that I did recognize as vintage and pulled off. But something about, I just glanced at the ink and thought, oh, modern. And even if it was modern, this is a pro grade symbol. What am I doing putting that on that kit? So that was a mistake, but now I've got it back because that has made the journey through the whole thing. This symbol was not one that was on it when I sold it, but since has been put on it and was included in this. And this is, again, a pro grade symbol. Sabian AAX. It's an early version of the Explosion logo. So this is something that I will be pulling off of this now and selling separately. Both those symbols I'll sell separately, which means I'll be replacing them. The hats I sold it with, I actually did get back in the sale because I saw them lying in a corner and asked for them, but they have a crack. They're nice hats, but they have a crack, and I've since kind of learned that I don't want to get in the business of selling kits with cracked symbols because, again, you sort of cut your market down. So I'll be putting these hats on instead, and this crash ride instead, which means I will also be taking back this nice boom stand, because I'll just sell this with one symbol, hats and one symbol, a crash ride, as opposed to selling it with two symbols. And that tends to be what I do these days by default, is to just, it's enough to play it. If you want something extra, then we can talk about selling something extra. The only other thing I'll do is that this still has the bass drum heads on it from when I first sold it. They're still in great shape. They're pretty nice heads, nicer than the rest of the heads. All the original heads are still on, or original from me heads are still on here and still in really decent shape. But they're like Remo pinstripes, and then this is a Remo Power Stroke. So I'm going to pull that and put a different Remo head on that matches the pinstripes instead, and then save this out for next time I have a little higher end kit that needs a good bass drum head. So with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and tune these up. They're already pretty clean. Nothing else to be done other than to swap out those heads, tune it up, and then make a little video of it. Post-COVID, I tend to make a demonstration of all the kits I'm going to sell, and then get this thing posted. So bear with me and let's take care of that.
Blade gonna shape a molten steel, gonna hammer it with stone, gonna make the leather peel. There's some water in the well, water in the stream, gonna douse our bodies cool, turn it all to steam. It's a late, late night, gonna get up early, but before I sleep, gonna get you dirty. It's a late, late night, gonna get up early, but before I sleep, gonna get you dirty. No dark. Swallow up this light, so bright, no joy. Swallow up this light, so bright, no joy. Can't swallow up this light.
Okay, so after setting it up, I always play it and, sometimes discover a few little odds and ends that need to be done or a few adjustments that I'd like to make. So, like, one of these bolts needed to be replaced. It was stripped out and not holding the tom on correctly. That's a case where I'm lucky that I have a stockpile of parts. Otherwise, I'd be off trying to find a bolt for that. I decided to cut a porthole in the resonant head so I could adjust the pillow because I wasn't liking how it was sounding with the pillow flush to both heads, and whoever actually buys this is probably going to want to be able to adjust that. There's a little bit of a grating squeak from the chain of the pedal rubbing against the actual pedal bed because the design of this makes it wrap around and under, so just put a little bit of gaffer tape there to just to keep that metal on metal friction to a minimum. And that's just kind of how it goes when you fix these things up. There's little adjustments that need to be made, and then you're ultimately good to go. And that's why, if you're going to do this repeatedly, starting to stockpile those little things, parts and heads and symbols and hardware, becomes a necessity. It reminds me of one thing about this kit when I first got it, was that it was missing a spur on the bass drum, and it was going to be kind of expensive to buy a new one. I ultimately saved a little money by manufacturing one from some rod stock at Lowe's, and then found a guy on Craigslist who was selling parts that included feet for floor toms, which is the same gauge rod stock. So even that, though, ended up being like $25 that I wish I hadn't had to spend on getting just a simple part that was missing. So that's just one of those things. If you're gonna take this on, be mindful, be really looking closely at what might be missing, anticipating that when you're estimating what your cost all in is going to be. Okay, let's take a quick listen to how this thing sounds, and then I'll bid you adieu. So.